What I think about is every bump that I take, it makes it easier for people coming behind me. And I think, especially right now in my life, in my career, that's the most important thing to me.
You talk in the book about how you like being called an image architect. What's an
Yes.
image? What's an image architect?
Take something and transform people's perception of that thing or person. When was gracious enough to be able to get the call from Celine and her team at that time, and said that she wanted to kind of come out and have the world reimagine the way we looked at her. Because I think for so long we had thought she was so much older than what she was, because she had been in our lives at that point for 30 years. And I think we just kind of tacked those 30 years onto her. But that Celine that I got to meet was so young and so vivacious and so fashion forward. I just think that no one ever just had the opportunity to see it. And so what I did was kind of devise this blueprint, if you will, of the way and the channels that we would go to show the world just the Celine that I had got a chance to meet.
Do you have to talk her into that? Like, is as much of that trying to present me with, hey, this is who Celine actually is, but do you also have to talk to her like, hey, this is who you actually are?
No, I think she knew who she was the whole time. I just think that the world's perception of Celine, the diva, the grande dame, the queen of Vegas, the baroness of bugle beats and sequins. We had ourselves had created this image of her and put her in this place where she didn't feel tangible or real or even cool. And so it was my job with that blueprint to kind of figure out again the ways to change the world's perception of her.
Well, I want to give another example of that image architect stuff. So, and this is for people who are listening to this who aren't as familiar with what you do. So, I'm going to play you a clip right now of one of your clients, Carrie Washington, explaining what you did for her as a young black female actor, showing up to red carpets early in
Mm-hmm.
her career.
Eventually, I met Law, and Law saw in me something different, something raw, more true. And he challenged me and guided me to stop dropping the persona and become more of myself on the carpet and in my life.
I think we often hear about fashion as a way to make us something else. Like, I am a plaid shirty, band t-shirt jeans guy, but with fashion, I can be a tuxedo or I can be a more sophisticated person. Kerry Washington, they're saying you did something very interesting to her, that you made her feel like more of herself. Well, what is she
Mm-hmm.
getting at there?
I think sometimes it takes someone to see something in you that you don't necessarily see in yourself. I didn't change her at all. I didn't, and Celine, I didn't change Celine at all. Those women were who they were, and they are who they are. I just think that they just needed someone to kind of reassure or remind them of different parts of themselves that may have been hidden, or someone have told them to hide, or wasn't appropriate, or something like that. And I think my biggest gift is letting women feel encouraged and empowered and free. And I think that's what Carrie's talking about in that snippet from her speech.
What's interesting about your story is that, a lot of the fashion and stylists that, you would meet at your level, they would have, they would have had a parent who interned at Vogue, or they would have had a
Yeah.
parent who would have helped them get into the, New York
Mm.
Fashion Week or something like that. But one of the
Hmm.
things you learn about in the book is how different your trajectory was. You grew
Yeah.
up on the south side of Chicago, and you say that the scrappiness that comes from growing up there is your superpower.
Yes.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because in the landscape of fashion, and in particular the section of what I did and what I do, it is exactly what you explained. There's a lot of people who are very successful, but they come from the lineage and the legacy of someone else. I had to hustle basically to even feed myself growing up in Chicago at points in my life. So I think what living that type of childhood instills a certain drive and a certain cleverness to be able to make it wherever you put me or whatever I try to do, and I just brought that all to Hollywood with me. Um, yeah, it was I had to go out and figure things out and learn. I almost had to build the plane while I was flying it, to say per se. So yeah, but all of those things was instilled in me as a young boy in Chicago.
Yeah, like you're right. Instead of having Anna Wintour as your great aunt or something like that, or instead of like your dad being friends with Diana Vreeland or something like that, you're the real architect of you as a young person getting interested in fashion was your grandmother.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about your grandmother.
My grandmother was my first fashion icon, and my first fashion show, or first fashion event was church on Sunday mornings with, all the beautiful Black women in the matching skirt sets and pumps, and there's their stockings and the big church hats, and walking into that every Sunday morning. It was a fashion show, and I didn't even know it was a fashion show until I was older and figured it out. But I think that sparked something in me, and it also gave me a sense of pride of having somewhere that I had to dress up to go to. We all know, like you mentioned earlier, like you're a t-shirt, band t-shirt and plaid guy, but when you bring fashion into it and you put on a tuxedo, there's a different feeling that tuxedo gives you, right? It gives you a sense of pride, and when you look at yourself, you see yourself in a way that you don't see yourself regularly. You may seem even a little more handsome to yourself, and that's the power of fashion. And I got all that pride and those sensibilities from going to church on Sunday morning.
But I think you also got the ability to know that you don't have to spend $40,000 on a gown in order to feel that way. For people who
Absolutely.
aren't as familiar with your career, one of the things you're really amazing at is reaching in the back catalog of these designers and designing these sort of incredible vintage pieces. But a lot of that comes from your grandmother too, like hanging around secondhand stores with your grandmother, right?
Yes, yes. That the thrift stores were a wonder world of possibilities and treasures and so many. It was and again, these are all things that I was put into, but I didn't understand what was going on. I didn't really understand that this was shaping me for my future.
Right.
And so when I got older and I went back into the thrift stores out of necessity, because I just didn't have the money to go to the department stores. So it helped me cultivate my style, and doing that is when I made a business out of it, and and that business got me into moving to LA and styling and meeting Zendaya, and also I just never let that go, and so. That's why I think archival, pools and vintage fashion has always been such a big passion of mine. And also I just think of myself as a storyteller, and what greater story is to put someone in something that someone's already worn before.
Paint me the picture of those secondhand stores you used to go. Like, what were the name? What were the secondhand stores you used to go to with your grandmother? What do you remember
Oh
seeing?
wow! So there was in Chicago. We had a lot of Salvation Armies and Value Village, and it's tons of them. It was really tons of them, and we would go to a lot. My grandmother used to collect salt and pepper shakers, and while she was finding those and inspecting them, the quality of them, and asking me did I think they were cute, or figurines, and I used to just run around and play with toys, and I remember just running and kind of zipping through all the women's dresses, not knowing that me and those dresses would help me become Law Roach that I am today.
Well, it's not just your eye for fashion, but it's also like a tremendous savviness in the industry that comes through in this book. So just to catch people up, eventually you start running your own store called Deliciously Vintage. Gets a lot of press when Kanye West stops in with his then girlfriend Amber Rose. And that leads to, as you just mentioned, meeting Zendaya. So Zendaya right now, one of the biggest movie stars in the entire world. Your Dune, your Challengers. Back then, a teenager on the Disney Channel, and this is where your savviness really comes in.
Yeah.
You looked at her, you said you had a plan for her to be a chameleon. What does that
Yeah.
mean?
Well, a lot of back then, more so than now, girls had an aesthetic, right? They had a certain haircut or a certain hair color, or they always wore a particular design or a particular silhouette. And so my thing was for her not to have a look at all. People like, well, what's her look? What's her aesthetic? And I would always say she doesn't have one, because we just were in this thing of trying things. And what I figured out early on is, the girl who got the most press got the best dress, and so we were in a place where no one was lending us clothes at all. And so I needed a way to make people pay more attention to her. And that was one of the ways I did it. And this other way that I did it, I would only put her in dresses that people had wore before.
You got to tell this story.
You know,
This story is hilarious in the book. So tell this story. Tell the story.
Yeah, so around 10 years ago, the weeklies were really big in America. I don't know about in Canada, but there always was a section that was who wore it better. And that was a huge fashion faux pas for a girl to get seen in the same dress as another girl. But it did happen. And so it always would be who wore it best. So I'm like, okay, they're doing these every week and millions of people are paying attention to it. I know that the fashion press is paying attention to this. So I would go into showrooms and I would write designers and they would say no. And I would say, well, what about this dress? And they would say, someone already wore it. And I was like, well, I don't really mind if you don't mind lending it. But all the time I knew that this girl, she was tall and gorgeous. And I just, I would put a sure bet that she would wear it better. And 97% of the time, she always won. And people started to pay attention. People really started to pay attention.
So
and
smart.
our
This is
world
so
started
smart.
to open up.
It's so smart to see that there's a spot in every weekly magazine of who wore it better, and it's going to be two, like, I don't know, you're Courtney Cox and Anne Hathaway, and they're going to be wearing the same dress, and the people are going to comment on that. And you think to yourself, for the first time, how can I use that to my advantage? I'm going to find out what other people are wearing, and I'm going to put Zendaya in that because she'll get pressed that way.
Yeah. And it worked.
It certainly did. Now, I want to talk a little bit about what I was talking about in terms of the strength of pushing back on the fashion industry and on the media as well. So there's this really famous example you write about in the book about Zendaya. You put her in locks and a gown on the Oscars red carpet, and someone says it made her look like she smelled of patchouli oil and weed. When the two of you responded to that, what was the response behind the scenes like for you?
Oh, she was so young. She was so young, and being surrounded by strong men. Our first initial reaction is we wanted to fight. We wanted to fight. We wanted to protect her at all costs because at that point I think she was 15 or 16 years old, and for someone to say that on national television. In a time where social media was really kind of blowing up, and that had to be repeated over and over and over again. And she told us, she just told us to basically just to calm down, and she went in her room and she wrote this response herself. And her mom and her dad were both teachers, and so all she asked is that her mom just spell check it for her and check the grammar. But the words were her words, and she released that statement, and that was the end of it. I remember there were so many journalists from around the world that wanted to interview her and us, and once she put that statement out, it was done. We put that behind us. But that conversation opened up so many other conversations on what's appropriate for Black women's hair in the workplace, in school, on the red carpets. And so, I think that she was able to turn a situation, a bad situation, into a great situation.
There's a real fearlessness in you,
Well, thank you.
Don't you think?
Well, I think, if you say so. It's just, what it is I'm just not afraid. I don't think I'm afraid to do what's right or to say what's right, because what I think about is every bump that I take. It makes it easier for people coming behind me, and I think, especially right now in my life, in my career, that's the most important thing to me.
To set the stage for folks who can come behind you, who maybe didn't have the same opportunities that you didn't have, and maybe for them to have an easier road getting in there.
Yeah. It's just like when you have kids and you become a parent, you want your children to have it much easier than you did and have more and greater experiences than you were able to have. And that's the way I think about, everyone who's trying to do what I do, and especially the kids that look like me, and come from the same place and the same beginnings that I come from. I just want to make the road, less bumpy, for lack of a better phrase.
Let's just go back to the Celine example. We talked about this off the top. That Celine, we talked about the Celine-essence. It was this great moment of her coming back, sort of rebranding herself after My Heart Will Go On. But I should also mention that was a time when Celine Dion, especially here in Canada, we were paying attention to the fact that she lost her husband. She lost her brother. No one knew it yet. I interviewed her around this time, and she was starting to show the symptoms of stiff person syndrome. She's obviously been in the press a lot these days for, talking to my colleagues about whether she'll be able to sing or not. And you write that you were touched by Celine because you can relate to the power of starting over. So this is a big question, but what is the connection between changing your clothes and changing your life? You know what I mean? Like, it's not just what you wear.
Yeah, I think we just negate sometimes how powerful fashion can be, and I think that that Celine in 2016, when I first started working with her, she gave an interview and she said that working with me and being around the clothes and the fashion helped her heal and helped her get through some of the sadness and the grief of losing Renee. And every time I think about the moment she told me that, I get really emotional because at that point, I don't even know that I had realized the power of fashion. And I think we look at it as this thing that's a necessity to keep us warm or, keep us modest. But there's so much more passion in it. I really do believe that and I write about this in the book, that if you create a power piece, right, this one piece of clothing or this one outfit or whatever that makes you feel good, that maybe you've gotten a million compliments every time you wear it. If you put that on when you're feeling your lowest, it has the power to instantly transform your mood and take you to a better place. And I just think that we just lessen the power that clothes and fashion really has in helping us just navigate this crazy, insane world that we live in.
What a beautiful way of putting it. Do you? None of my business. Do you guys still talk? I know she did the Olympics a little while ago. Are you still in touch with her?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I did when her first appearance out from we hadn't seen her in I think almost 4 years. Is when she came to the Grammys.
She presented Album of the Year. Yeah, I
yes,
remember.
we reunited for that. Yes, and yes, we are talking, and and even when retirement, I'm not working with anyone but Zendaya, really. But any and every time Celine calls, I will answer for sure.
Well, we're all rooting for her. So let's talk about this retirement. In the fashion world, this was massive news. You shocked a lot of fans last year. You announced on Instagram that you were retiring from celebrity styling. So eventually, I'm going to ask you what retirement means for you, because it's an interesting definition of retirement. But what made you want to post that right at the height of your success?
Well, I think that I had a tragedy the year before in my family that I never really got a chance to deal with. So that was part of it, and the other part of it is that I still felt like I had to fight to be respected, even though I had did things like help with the reinvention of Celine and taking Zendaya from a Disney star to a fashion icon.
And ushering Ariana Grande from being involved in this horrible terrorist attack and having PTSD from the death of her boyfriend to like coming back out onto the scene. I mean, that was so much you.
Yeah, and I had this so and these things, and it just felt like because of the way I looked and where I came from, that every single day I had to reprove myself, and I was just tired of it, and that's what I meant about the politics of it.
To who? To whom did you have to prove yourself?
To the people that make the decisions. To the gatekeepers, to those people, and it was right off the heels of a conversation that I had with one of my clients and their publicist, and I found myself on the phone defending myself and my process, even though I had, obviously changed the fashion trajectory of this said client. And I just was tired of it. And I was also getting to the place where I didn't feel happy anymore and I didn't feel fulfilled. I think that my business had gotten so big that the joy of actually doing it had left me some. And so I just needed to step back, and I also felt like I was becoming a very selfish person, which I also talked about in the book. And I wanted to get back to the reason and to the love that made me want to do it in the first place.
You had some of the biggest folks in fashion in your industry telling you not to do this. You had Naomi Campbell telling you to take the post down. You had Iman saying they would not accept it. So what was that like for you, having some of the most prestigious people in fashion telling you, no, buy, stop it, give it up, you know?
I retired and then I walked into a fitting because I was walking in the boss show the next day and Naomi was there and she pulled me in. She called Edward Info and they were begging me, but I was just in such a place that I was numb that I didn't even hear any of that. It took me a month to actually go back and read all the comments that people had left. There was thousands of them. It took me a month to go back and to see how much that I meant to people and how much that people cared about me. And it actually helped me heal because when I retired, I feel like part of me died and I had to grieve that. And I had to go through all the steps of grief. I had to go to the guilt. I thought that, I felt guilty for walking away and I thought maybe I looked like I was a quitter to all the people who looked up to me. And it was so tough. It was so tough. And that lasted for a while and I was depressed and I didn't know who I was outside of being Roach, the image architect. And I didn't know if I would ever have a place in fashion anymore. And so once I got through all of that, I came out and now I can proudly say that I'm the happiest I think I've ever been in my entire life because of that one Instagram post that kind of, shocked the world.
What are the guideposts around your retirement? Like you're not, I should say for people who are listening to this thinking that La Roach is lying on a like a beach chair, all day by the pool playing shuffleboard. Like it's not that kind of retirement.
Well, it was that type of requirement for many, many months.
Oh, really? What was your...
It was. And it was Zendaya who called and said, I got these 2 movies coming out, Dune and Challengers, and get your ass up and get ready to work.
And you were like, I got pickleball. I can't do that.
Yeah, and it was her. And, also when I came out of depression, I also had this power to say, you know what? I'm not a liar if I say that, I'm going to come back and I'm going to, work with Naomi Campbell for the opening of her exhibit at the V&A Museum. I'm not a liar if I come back and work with Zendaya for Dune and Challengers. And, I have this power to say I can do whatever I want. And my retirement is whatever I say it is.
So what is it now?
It's that my no's are greater and more powerful than the yeses.
Meaning that you're being extremely selective about what you do.
Yes.
And how does that feel?
I thought, again, coming from, when if anyone who's listening has ever experienced the feeling of going to bed hungry and crying because there wasn't enough food for you and your siblings, what that does to you as a child, it makes you almost feel like you have to say yes to every opportunity because that opportunity can be your last. And me walking away from my career and walking away from all the money for the time that I did, it told me, it gave me the confidence to say, hey, that'll never happen. You'll never be in that situation again. I had to tell the little boy with the growling stomach that you don't have to work out of that place of fear anymore.
So I think up until now, maybe this is a good way to close things off. I think up until now, what we've heard here is a couple of things. One is that the way you dress is a reflection of who you truly are or who you truly want to be. And we've also heard your amazing story of coming from, secondhand Salvation Army thrift stores in the south side of Chicago, no connection to the industry, to really revolutionizing the industry. So I'm going to put this to you. Your life has changed a lot in the past few years. You've also had a realization of who you really are. What story do you think you tell in the way you dress these days?
I tell a story of freedom and happiness and joy. I think the way I dress is just a outward pour of the joy that I feel on the inside. I'm refiguring out what my style is. I'm just trying stuff. I went and bought a fuchsia pink dress the other day. I'm living. I'm really just living and figuring it out and just being happy and letting my fashion and my style show that.
I guess in my mind, I'm like, I hear you have this massive realization of, when you go to bed hungry, you have to say yes to everything. I have more
Yeah.
autonomy. I have more say over myself.
Yes.
I'm just praying for this. Is there an example of something you were wearing then that you don't wear now, or something that you weren't wearing then that you wear now that you're sort of more self-actualized?
Well, I think when I was working, like I had a uniform, right? I was taking, oh God, 4 or 5 flights a week. I was in 3 countries. I could be in 3 countries, and I could be in 2 countries, 3 times a week. So the job was, it wasn't about me. It was throw something in a bag and put on all black and this uniform and just work and be behind the scenes and do what it is. And now I'm moving more and becoming in front of the camera and becoming more public facing. I'm figuring out what my individual style is and how I want to present myself. But I'm choosing things. I'm going into places and I'm choosing things that exactly what I tell people to do in the book. Choose things that's going to make you feel happy and that you want to wear over and over again and that you want to live in.
It's a beautiful thing. If you need any help with the green corduroy, I'll help you out whenever you need it. I'll go
I
back
appreciate
I
that
can
so
hook you up.
much.
Such a joy to meet you. Thank you so much for making the time for us.
No, thank you for having me. It was such a great conversation.